In the winter of 1887, a blizzard roared through Wyoming like a mournful cry from the deep recesses of Western history. The sky was dark, the wind was howling, and the snow was covering the land in white. At a lonely train station on the outskirts of Cheyenne, a woman sat huddled on a cold wooden chair, her coat thin, her lips purple, her eyes dry from the wind and snow. In her hand, a small leather bag, the only thing left in her life. In it was nothing but 3 coins, a faded photograph, and a wounded heart. Her name was Elizabeth Rose Montgomery, and people called her Libby. Only a few months ago, Libby had been a famous nurse at a large charity hospital in Philadelphia, a young, intelligent, ambitious girl who always devoted herself to her patients and never bowed to injustice. But then, like a cruel knife cut through her life, Libby found herself at the center of a scandal she never thought she would be caught up in. A powerful doctor named Harrison had tried to force himself on her in the infirmary late that night. Libby was not silent. She fought back, breaking the bridge of his nose with a metal chamber pot. A brave act of self-defense, but one that would spell doom for her future. He was rich, well-connected, and no one believed a young nurse standing alone against a famous doctor. The hospital fired her. Other medical facilities closed their doors because of her questionable record. Doors were closed in Philadelphia City that had once been a city of faith. Libby scraped together her last few dollars and bought a train ticket west. They need healers more than liars, she thought. Mining towns, wilderness areas where the gold rush and frontier wars had not yet brought enough doctors or midwives. She set out, hoping to regain her dignity and a new life. But fate continued to play tricks on her. By the time the train stopped in Cheyenne, she was broke. The boarding houses had turned her away for not being able to pay her room. And now, in the cold December storm, she sat waiting for the next train, perhaps the last one she would have the strength to wait for. The wind whipped against Libby's face, stinging her eyes. Her thin breath made white streaks in the air, fading and disappearing. Her fingers had lost feeling long ago. No one was at the station, not a soul. An old wooden station, creaking in the wind, set in the middle of a cold white wilderness. It was not just the cold of winter, it was the cold of abandonment, of hopelessness, of a future torn apart by the lies of a distant city. Just then, the sound of hooves rang out in the distance, steady, heavy, as if the ground itself were signaling what was coming. Libby looked up, her eyes almost blinded by the snow, trying to see the sound. A dark shape emerged through the whiteness, a man on horseback. The horse was jet black, with high, powerful hooves, and the rider wore a thick cloak, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. The man, if he were on screen, would have been the embodiment of a Western hero, strong, reserved, mysterious. As he dismounted, snow splattered under the thick leather soles of his boots. He did not walk quickly. It was as if each step was accustomed to the cold wind. With determination and authority, he tied the horse to a post outside the station, then opened the door and stepped inside. A cold wind rushed in, hitting Libby like one last blow from nature. She shivered. The man saw her immediately. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, his voice deep and warm, with a slight Texas twang. The kind of voice that was hard to disbelieve. "It's a cold night, sitting here alone." And Libby tried to smile, but her lips were stiff with cold. The first words were difficult to get out of her throat. "No, okay." He looked down, his eyes changing from wary to genuinely concerned. Not the social kind, but the look of someone who had seen the cold kill. He took off his gloves, stepped closer, and sat down beside her. For a split second, Libby could see his face hard, with sun-lined corners, but clean and sincere. She could see that he was young, maybe in his early 30s, but his eyes had seen many storms. "Jack Thornton," he said, holding out a large hand. "I have a ranch up north, the Double T Ranch." Libby hesitated before shaking his hand, but finally touched it gently. Hers was ice cold. His was warm and hard as sun-dried stone. "Elizabeth Montgomery," she whispered. "A nurse from Philadelphia." Jack's eyes widened slightly. A nurse in a land where doctors were scarce. A woman in the middle of winter, in a cold train station. Alone. So poor she couldn't even afford a ticket to the next train, and yet she maintained her dignity. Her dignity unbroken. "You'll freeze to death if you sit here another hour," Jack said, not threateningly, just plainly. "You need warmth, food, and a place to think." And Libby looked at him, her eyes a mixture of hope and suspicion. She had learned that not everyone who reached out a hand could be trusted. But there was something about this man, something that didn't make her heart shrink with fear. "Where?" she asked. "The hotel across the street," Jack replied, his voice calm. "I was worried, not because I expected anything, but because people shouldn't freeze to death on the street." So, he took off his thick coat and draped it over her shoulders. Instantly, she felt a strange warmth spread through her. The smell of horsehide, smoke, and something very human. "Can you walk?" Jack asked. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't listen. She almost collapsed. But before she could touch the floor, Jack was lifting her, firmly, naturally. There was no motive in those arms, just responsibility, steadiness, and, surprisingly, a sense of security. She thought had died long ago. "We'll talk later," Jack said as they stepped out of the station. "For now, I'll take you away from here." The storm was still raging outside, but in the arms of a stranger, Libby no longer felt alone. And as they crossed the street in the winter night, amidst the storm and the snow, she had only one question on her mind. Can she trust a stranger in a land where the law is uncertain? Or is this where she will start over and find the life she deserves? Continue reading. Jack crossed the street, his arms holding Libby tightly in his strong but gentle embrace. The wind whistled, stinging his face like needles, and the snow clung to the back of his shirt. But the man did not slow down. Before them was a low-rise brick building, the Cattleman's Hotel, the warmest place in this icy town. As Jack pushed open the hotel door, warmth rushed out, and the yellow light from the oil lamps illuminated Libby's pale face. The space inside seemed to belong to another world. There was laughter, the smell of roasting meat, and men sitting by the fireplace with glasses of wine in their hands. When they saw Jack Thornton enter, carrying a woman in his arms, all eyes turned to him, but no one said anything, because the name Jack Thornton was no stranger in this area. The owner of the Double T Ranch, a man respected for his decisiveness and fairness. When he spoke, people listened. When he acted, people did not stop him. The thin receptionist, Perkins, came forward at once, his eyes anxious. "Mr. Thornton, what is it?" "This woman is half frozen to death at the station," Jack said firmly. "I need the best room. Send up some hot food, coffee, some thick blankets, and if Dr. Williams is in town, send him." "Yes, sire." At once. Libby did not remember exactly how she was carried upstairs, only that it had all been like a dream, full of smoke and wool. Jack sat her down in a chair by the fireplace in the great room. The fire was blazing before her. He took off her wet shoes, placed her cold feet close to the flames without a word of complaint. Then he made coffee from the iron pot, poured it into a porcelain cup, and handed it to her with his large, warm hands. "Drink it slowly. It's warm so it doesn't upset your heart." She took it. Her lips trembled as she touched the steaming cup. The heady scent, the slight bitterness and sweetness that warmed her cold chest. But it was the way Jack looked at her, then his eyes, not filled with lust or pity, but with quiet appreciation that made Libby's heart ache. How long had it been since she'd been looked at like that? How long since she'd been treated like a human being? Jack sat down across from her, rubbing his hands together, looking straight at her, not forcing, not asking, simply waiting for her to be ready. "You don't have to do all this," she whispered, her eyes on the fire, avoiding his. "I know," Jack replied, "but I want to. You might think I'm easy. A homeless girl, penniless, needing a place to stay." "No," Jack interrupted, his voice slow, firm. "I think you're the strongest person I've ever met, even in the middle of a snowstorm. You don't beg. You don't whine. You hold yourself like you have something to protect. I don't look down on that. I respect it." Libby was silent. Hot tears welled up in her eyes, rolling down her cold cheeks, not because she was weak, but because this was the first time in so many days that someone had believed her without proof. "We don't know each other," Jack said, "but I can see the strength in someone. I need someone like you." What do you mean?" "My farm, the Double Tiz, about 20 miles from here. I have 60 year-round workers, and hundreds in the peak season. They work hard, and they get hurt often. I've lost people because no one knows. First aid, I've put ads in newspapers from Denver to Kansas, looking for doctors, nurses, but no one wants to come to this remote area. And you're a nurse, right?" Libby nodded. "I'm certified from nursing school in Philadelphia, worked at a charity hospital for over 4 years. But now I have nowhere else to go. And then come with me. I'll give you a fair wage, a place to stay, and all the medical supplies. No strings attached, no conditions." The words almost made Libby dizzy. An offer from a stranger, right when she had nothing left, and yet there was no hint of anything fishy, no scrutinizing glances, no unnecessary touches. "Why trust me?" she asked, her voice still trembling. Jack smiled, his eyes suddenly dark. "Because I asked about you before." Libby jerked her head up, alert. "What?" "I was at the hotel this afternoon. I heard from Mr. Perkins that a nurse had come from the east, asking about work. I decided to go to the station, hoping you hadn't left yet." "So, it wasn't a coincidence?" Jack nodded. "Yes. I don't know who you are, but I know someone who has left everything after her reputation was ruined for standing up to injustice, someone I want to meet." Libby sat still. A mixture of emotions surged through her: surprise, relief, doubt, gratitude. She had thought she could only survive on defense. But now, in front of her was a man, not only saving her from freezing to death, but also showing her a new path. Was this fate, or was it just a good man who happened to pass by her life? She didn't know, but she knew one thing. If she missed this opportunity, she would never be able to turn back. Jack stood up and walked toward the door. "I'll let you rest. Tomorrow, if you want, we'll go to Double T together." He turned back, his eyes shining with sincerity. "But know that you don't owe me anything. The decision is yours." Then he gently closed the door, leaving Libby alone in the warm room. She could still hear the wind howling outside, But for the first time in months, there was a very peaceful silence in her heart. A new beginning was waiting for her. If only she had the courage to take it. The next morning, the snow had stopped. The sunlight glistened on the white roofs and the narrow streets, making the town of Cheyenne look like gold. Libby stood by the hotel window, watching the scene with a strange feeling. Only last night, she had thought she would freeze to death on the cold wooden bench at the train station. Now, she was about to embark on a whole new journey. Jack arrived on time, as promised. He had brought her a thick wool coat, a new pair of riding boots, and a dark brown scarf. "Consider it an advance on your pay," he said when she tried to refuse. His eyes left no room for argument. When this man decided what was right, he would see it through. They left town as the sun was just above the horizon, riding side by side across the vast snow-covered plains. The sky was clear. The air was cold but dry, and much more pleasant than the humid winds of the east. On both sides of the road were pine trees standing still in the snow, and in the distance were dark green mountains, like a windbreak of the land. Libby sat on the horse, feeling strange but not uncomfortable. Jack rode beside her, occasionally pointing to landmarks. "That's Bear Creek, where we water the cattle. Over there are the cottonwoods, a great place to rest in the summer." She listened quietly, like a good schoolgirl taking every word to heart. After 3 hours of riding, they reached the edge of a large valley. Below, the Double T Ranch appeared like a small town, a log and stone main house with a wide porch, surrounded by barns, warehouses, a blacksmith shop, and workers' quarters. Smoke rose from the chimneys. The sound of cattle echoed in the air. Everything was orderly, neat, alive like a great machine, working tirelessly. "Welcome to Double T," Jack said with a smile. "This is your home now." The first to greet Libby was Tom Bradley, the farm manager. He was about 50, a sturdy man with a tanned face but warm eyes. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Montgomery," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "We hear you're a real nurse. I can't believe it." I hope I don't disappoint," Libby said softly. "Just do what you've always done. Believe me, as long as you know how to bandage properly and drain pus, you're 100 miles ahead of the nearest doctor." Jack took Libby to the small cabin next to the main house, which would serve as her private quarters and medical office. The house was neat and clean, with a small living room, a bedroom, and a simple but cozy kitchen. In the back, a room had been converted into a complete clinic operating table, medicina cabinet, and neat medical instruments. Libby stood there, speechless. "I ordered it months ago," Jack explained. "I still hope to find the right person someday." That afternoon, Libby began work immediately. A man had sprained his ankle after falling from a horse. A young man had injured his hand from a saw blade. A kitchen boy had a minor burn from hot oil. Libby handled each case with the professionalism and calmness of a veteran. The cowboys were hesitant at first, but with each treatment they grew more impressed. They had never met a woman who was strong, agile, who could laugh and give orders at the same time. A week later, when everyone had grown accustomed to seeing Libby roaming the camp, checking on health, handing out cold medicine, and wrapping up injuries, the unexpected happened. Danny, an 18-year-old who had been working at the camp for only a few months, had an accident while leading his horses. A bolt of lightning struck nearby, sending the horses into a panic. Danny was trampled on the chest by the biggest horse on the camp as he tried to keep his stall still. He was rushed to the clinic in critical condition, unconscious, breathing poorly. Blood seeping from his mouth and ears. One side of his chest had collapsed. We need a doctor, Tom said, his voice anxious. There's no time, Libby said, urgently. He's bleeding internally. I have to operate now. He'll be dead in less than an hour. And everyone froze. Surgery, right there, without proper anesthesia. Without a doctor's assistant, I need a strong light. Boiling water, clean towels, a needle and thread, and a helping hand. Libby said firmly, nobody panic. If you can't help, leave. Tom, his face tight, nodded and got to work. In less than 20 minutes, the clinic had transformed into a makeshift operating room. Libby washed her hands, donned an apron, and set out the instruments. Danny was placed on the operating table, her face pale. The air was heavy and frozen. Outside, the wind blew through the eaves. But inside, life was in the balance. Libby began to work. Each incision, each knife stroke, each stitch, all precise, powerful, yet kind. Sweat soaked the back of her shirt. Her hands shook slightly with tension. But she did not stop. Blood flowed. Tears fell from the onlookers. But she did not cry. She had seen life slip through her fingers before, and she would not let it happen again. 3 hours later, when the last needle and thread were tied, Libby stepped back. Her eyes red, but her gaze still bright. Danny was alive. Her breathing was even, her pulse steady. He's gone, she said, and sank into a chair as if she had weathered a storm. Jack stood in the doorway, where he had silently watched the operation. His eyes were filled with an emotion Libby could not name. Not admiration, not just gratitude, but a profound recognition that the woman before him was not just a nurse, but a warrior. From that moment, everything changed. In the eyes of the men at Double T Ranch, she was no longer a woman from the Far East. She was the one who saved one of their own. In the West, you weren't judged by your birth or your reputation. You were judged by what you did and how you did it. And Libby Montgomery, from that moment on, was no longer a stranger. She had become an indispensable part of this harsh land, a part of Double T, and something deeper and irreplaceable part of Jack Thornton's heart. But they didn't realize it yet. No words, no promises, just quiet afternoons when Jack stood and watched Libby from afar as if he were watching something precious he had just found in the wilderness. Spring of 1888 came early to Wyoming, bringing soft rays of sunshine across the Double T Valley. The grass began to green again. The horses' hooves pounded the damp ground, and life was more vibrant than ever in the hearts of the ranchers. For Libby, the months of working at Double T were not only a journey of healing for others, but also a way for her to heal herself. Every wound in her heart, the wound of betrayal, of trampled trust, began to heal under the hands of hard work. The honest greetings of the cowboys, and most of all, under the eyes of Jack Thornton. Every evening, after work, Jack would bring 2 cups of hot tea to Libby's cabin. They sat on the front steps, watching the stars and chatting. At first, it was just short stories about the ranch, about growing vegetables, about the health of the workers. But gradually, the stories went further, about family, about loss, about forgotten dreams. In the quiet moments, amid the buzz of insects and the breeze blowing through the porch, something had quietly sprouted. One night, after Libby had finished nursing a long-standing fever, she stepped out onto the porch, exhausted but relieved. Jack had been standing there, holding a small box in his hand. He said nothing, just handed it to her. Inside was a silver brooch, delicately carved in the shape of a wildflower, a flower that only grew around the farm in the spring. No flowery words, no formulaic declaration of love, just a look at her and a nod that said, he was ready. Libby understood, and she nodded too. News of the wedding spread like a spring breeze across the prairie. The entire Double T was jubilant in preparation. Martha, Cook Cookie's wife, took charge of the wedding dress. Tom Bradley stood in for her father and walked her down the aisle. The farm workers, accustomed to dirt and horseback, were now groomed, setting up a simple stage in front of the main house. Covered with wildflowers, guests came from all over, Jack's friends from Denver, neighbors from Cheyenne. Even a reporter from Chicago who had heard about the strange marriage between a Western millionaire and a fired nurse. On the wedding day, Libby stepped out in an ivory gown, her hair in a simple braid. Not flashy, but with a quiet elegance. Jack waited for her on the main porch, in a tailored black suit, his face radiant but not hiding his excitement. As the vows were spoken, as their hands clasped, as the first kiss was shared amid cheers and confetti, something in all who witnessed it broke. This was not just a wedding, but a testimony to the miracles that kindness and courage can bring. But happiness is never a smooth road. A week after the wedding, when Libby was handing out cold medicine to the children in the camp, a luxurious carriage stopped at the gate. A thin man, with a long face and sharp eyes, stepped out. Even though they had not seen each other for a long time, Libby recognized him immediately. Harrison. He was not alone. Beside him was a federal judge carrying a summons. With a cold smile, Harrison declared, "I am here to investigate the illegal practice of a person who was fired for poor ethics. She does not have a valid license to dissect or diagnose, and I will prove it to the law." Oh, when Jack heard the news, he stepped out of the stable, his face darkening. When he reached Harrison, without saying a word, he threw a punch that sent the doctor sprawling face down in the mud. Everyone around was stunned. Libby rushed forward in panic. "Jack." "No," Jack gasped, his eyes fixed on the person in front of him. "If you ever slander my wife again, I won't just punch you." Harrison stood up, wiping blood from his mouth, eyes full of hatred but not daring to fight back. "I'll see you in court," he hissed. 3 days later, in the Cheyenne County Courthouse, the case went to trial in public. Libby sat in the middle of a packed auditorium, Jack beside her, holding her hand. Harrison presented all the documents he could find to prove that Libby had been fired for misconduct, that she had no legal right to perform the surgery that saved Danny's life. The lies were repeated, word for word, just as they had been 2 years earlier in Philadelphia. And this time, unlike anything else, Libby was not alone. Danny, still with bandages around her chest, stepped to the witness stand. His voice was weak but clear. "If it weren't for her, I would be dead. I don't need paperwork. I just know she saved me with her own hands." Tom Bradley recounted the surgery, Cookie, Martha, and then each of the campers testified. They spoke with real emotion, without drama. A girl from the Far East, a person turned away from the world, had come to this harsh West and become the pillar of an entire community. The old town doctor spoke up. "I have reviewed the incision, the technique, the sutures. She is the best I have ever seen here. If this is unlawful practice, I recommend that the entire West be arrested." Finally, the old judge banged his gavel. "Elizabeth Montgomery Thornton, your conduct is not only lawful but commendable. You have demonstrated that character and conscience can overcome all prejudice. Your nursing license is hereby officially recognized throughout the entire territory of Wyoming. Now, the audience rose to applaud. Harrison left in silence, head bowed, unable to raise his head this time. That evening, at the Double T, the lights were brighter than usual. People brought pies, corn wine, and harmonicas played triumphant music. But in the midst of it all, Libby and Jack sat quietly together under the early summer moon, hand in hand. No words needed. "I couldn't protect you back then," Libby said softly, her eyes looking far away. "But today, I'm no longer afraid of the past. And I've always known," Jack said, placing his hand on her heart, "that your past only makes you stronger. It never defines you." Entry in the quiet of the night, where the fields stretched to the horizon, Libby knew that she had not only reclaimed her honor, but also herself. And with Jack, she would never walk alone again. Jack and Libby Thornton's post-wedding life was not a fairy tale, but a journey filled with responsibility, sharing, and many challenges. But along the way, their love did not fade, but grew deeper and deeper in the land of Wyoming, where they chose to start over just 6 months after the fateful trial. With the support of local authorities and investment from Jack himself, Libby established the first hospital in the Cheyenne area. It was a 2-story stone and wood house, simple and sturdy, in the spirit of the Wild West. Each room was bright, airy, with clean beds and standard medical equipment. In addition to caring for local residents, this hospital was also a place of training. The first nursing school in the Wyoming Territory was established here. Under Libby's guidance, young women, once known only for cooking and farming, now learned to bandage, inject, and even dissect with steady hands and confident eyes. Jack continued to expand. Double T. He invested in irrigation, horses, and cattle, making it one of the largest ranches in the West. But what he was most proud of was not the number of cattle or the acreage, but the fact that Double T had become a real community. There was a school for the workers' children, a chapelle, a store, and a library. People came here not just to work, but to live as one big family bound by faith and respect. In the main house on the ranch, Jack and Libby lived a simple but happy life. In 1890, Libby gave birth to twin boys, Thomas and Jackson Jr. The boys grew up to the sound of horses' hooves, the sound of hammers, and their mother's hearty laughter every morning. Thomas was quiet, observant, and helped his father run the business. Jackson Jr. was mischievous and as passionate about medicine as his mother. He hung around the clinic, learning how to bandage broken bones on chickens and rabbits. In 1892, the family welcomed a new member, a girl named Rebecca, named after Jack's first wife. Her eyes sparkled like stars, always carrying the energy of life and love. The whole farm seemed to be more bustling just because of her smile every morning. As the years passed, what Libby and Jack built was no longer just a love story, but a living legacy of kindness and indomitable will. Newspapers from the East began to write about them. The woman who saved the West, one newspaper called Libby. The man who rebuilt a community with love, another wrote about Jack. Historians have recorded their lives as emblematic of the pioneer era, where the American dream was not in the glittering cities, but in the farms of wind, mud, and hope. When Wyoming became a state in 1890, Jack Thornton was elected the first representative from Cheyenne to the state legislature, but he refused all privileges, agreeing only to serve as an advisor on agricultural and health policies. Libby, meanwhile, was invited to Boston to address the National Medical Convention, where she brought the audience to their feet when she concluded her speech by saying, A nurse doesn't need a title. She needs a heart, and the West gave me both. And, despite their fame, Libby and Jack never left the farm. For them, this was the true heart of life, where children grew up in the wild, where people were judged by their actions, and where a promise made in the snow was kept to the very end. In 1923, when Jack Thornton died at the age of 86, he was buried on the hill behind the farm, where they had sat watching the sun set, where he had first placed his hand on Libby's heart and promised she would never suffer alone again. 3 months later, Libby, though healthy, passed away quietly in her sleep, as if her heart had no reason to beat without her partner by her side. They were buried side by side, under a simple stone marker that read, "Forever and always." People came from all over the West to attend their memorial service. People whose lives Libby had saved, who had attended the nursing school she founded, former workers who Jack had given a second chance when no one else wanted them. They recounted the couple's love story as if it were a legendary anecdote. A New York journalist wrote, "We have had presidents and generals, but few have left such an imprint as the love of a nurse and a cowboy." Today, part of the land that used to be the Double T Ranch has become a museum. People have kept the small wooden house where Libby lived and treated patients, and the old operating table is still there, as evidence of a battle with death, won by courage and small hands. The main exhibition is inside the Cheyenne Hospital, named after her, where the annual medical conference honors Libby Thornton, a pioneer who paved the way for women to practice medicine on the frontier. Their 3 children would go on to become pillars of Wyoming. Thomas became a state senator, championing the rights of farmers and workers. Jackson Jr. became a doctor and started a mobile hospital system to serve the rural poor. Rebecca, the little girl with the bright eyes, chose to follow in their footsteps. She became the first licensed veterinarian in the state and married a rancher, continuing to run the remainder of the Double T as her parents had done since the beginning. On that hill, every spring, when the wild flowers begin to bloom, the Cheyennes still bring flowers to the graves of Jack and Libby, not as a ritual, but as a whisper of gratitude. And when the young couple stood before the Forever and Always plaque, they saw not just a love story, but a testament to the belief that kindness is never in vain. True love never fades, and that we all deserve a second chance if we are brave enough to open our hearts to strangers on a snowy winter night. Their story ended like a love song full of resonance, without noise or fanfare, but the resonance, a century later, is still strong enough to stir the hearts of those who once believed that miracles only happened in books. Because the truth is, miracles can begin with a cold train station, a greeting in the wind, and a person who refuses to let anyone die in the snowstorm. And from there, history is written with love. If you have followed us to the end of this story, perhaps your heart has been touched by the journey of Libby and Jack, a love that began in the middle of a snowstorm, grew up in adversity, and became a symbol of courage, kindness, and belief in second chances in life. That story is not only a love story of 2 people, but also a proof that sometimes the most lost moments are the starting point of the most beautiful things. If this story touches you, makes you believe a little more in people, in love, or simply gives you a few minutes of silence in the midst of a busy life, please leave a comment below. You can simply write "Forever and Always" as a greeting to the 2 people who lived, loved, and created a legend of the American West. And if you want to continue to be accompanied by emotional stories, legends told with heart and respect, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Share this video with those you believe also need something to believe in, to hope for, to love again. We will be back with many more stories about courage, about aspirations, and about ordinary people who have lived extraordinary lives. Thank you for listening until the end. See you on the next journey.